Welcome, dear friends, to our lecture on Sergei Prokofiev, who is another composer, pianist, and whose pianistic career and whose composerly career, both of them are very intertwined between themselves. So we'll start, as usual, traditionally, with discussing Prokofiev, the pianist. And he was a prodigy, of course. So you can see him here, not quite grown up, with a vocal score of Die Walküre, of Wagner's opera, yeah, which he was studying, obviously. And he was a prodigy as a composer, but not so much as a pianist. He had a very engaged mother who was pushing him quite a bit. And during one of the summer stays at the estate where his father was working, she hired a composer, Reinhold Glier, to work with him. And they developed a wonderful system of summer work. Every day he would be about 8 hours of work composition and studying various works and so on. But his piano playing at that time was still quite haphazard. So it was only when he got into St. Petersburg Conservatoire when he started working on his technique. And his teacher, his main teacher, was Anna Yesipova. I'm always glad to show you that there are women also in Russian music, and she was an incredibly important woman. She was a world-famous, well, European famous virtuoso, a performer of Chopin, very famously. And you see Madame Annette Esipov, you know, that's actually her advertising, yeah, some piece of music. But her style probably wasn't quite what Prokofiev would have wanted, and he wasn't quite a good representative of her school. So this is what she said: Prokofiev has assimilated my method only to a limited extent. He's very talented, but rather crude. And Glazunov, the composer Glazunov, who was at the time the director of the conservatoire, called him an original virtuoso of a new kind. I mean, I'm very struck by this idea that they already perceived that he was a virtuoso of a new kind. This is what we're going to talk about, that he introduced not just new compositional techniques, new kinds of music, but also a new style of piano playing. Yeah, and he said he's trying to produce the effects which are often beyond the piano's abilities, often at the expense of beauty of sound. So,
big subject.
Yes. So this is just a wonderful story with which everything begins. It's the story of his first piano concerto, and I put it here on the slide for you. I'm not going to read it out, but it roughly goes like this. Prokofiev decided to graduate from the piano faculty by playing his own piano concerto, and that was completely unprecedented. So he wasn't sure that he would be allowed to do that. And they said, well, okay, you can do that if you also play the Tannhäuser Fantasy, yeah, by Liszt, which he had already played with his recital, but he had to play it again. And just to make it even more ambitious and, you know, just shows you his character, he got it published just before the exam, so that all the members of the committee had the score of it newly, freshly minted, yeah, and could look at all these dissonances, yeah, that they so abhorred. So, yeah, and it was a complete triumph. He won a grand piano as a result of this competition. Yeah, and that is the recognition, I think, of the level that he achieved as a pianist. So just to give you a sample of his playing, this is not the first piano concerto, which he didn't record, but it's one of his early pieces, Suggestion diabolique, which means demonic possession. He plays it very fast.
Very well, actually.
Yeah, very well. And you have this rhythm, yeah, very sort of sense of rhythm that everyone remarked on. So just to show you the overall plan of his life, I mapped it out for you, and to show how the piano playing was connected to his composition. As you can see, his life is in 3 parts. Yeah, we have Russia, then we have 20 years in emigration, and then he goes back to the USSR and spends another almost 20 years there. And you can see that most of the concertos are concentrated during his period abroad. Yeah, and most of the sonatas were written before and after. And there is a reason for that, because he really developed this new idea of performing his own piano concerto as a kind of marketing thing. You know, he was getting triple fee if he was doing that. So, because he was doing that, other composers also started doing that, and that's why Stravinsky, I think we talked about it last time, that's why Stravinsky also decided to write a piano concerto and travel with it. And Ravel wrote a piano concerto, it didn't quite manage to play it. But, but nevertheless, that was the idea. That's why you have all these concertos there. Yeah, but the sonatas, as you can see, he wrote sort of 6 early works that I'm not even numbering, yeah, without opus numbers. Some of them were then reworked into numbers 1, 3, and 4, but number 2 is new, and then there's only one sonata, number 5, during the period of emigration, and then the most important probably, yeah, the 3 sonatas, 6, 7, 8, that he wrote in his Soviet period. And again, there is a reason of why they are so ambitious and so big, and that's actually the opposite reason. That's possibly because he didn't have to practice anymore, because the whole raison d'etre of his coming back to the Soviet Union, he was told by the officials, you will never have to practice again, you will never have to tour again, you will be able to concentrate on composition completely. And that was something that he indeed did. Yeah, so just sort of to finish this story of his piano playing, the last one he performed, he premiered publicly was the 6th. Yeah, and after that it was Gilels, Richter, yeah, and other wonderful Soviet pianists that were interested in his music.
Which was very much later, of course, than when he wrote the 2nd sonata.
Yes.
Very much later. Even the photographs make him look a lot older.
Yes.
And actually, I don't think Prokofiev was the only one, but I think composers around that time, when they were very young, tended to say things that were very anti-establishment and gave the impression that they wanted everything to be different and they were rejecting the past. And I suspect that particularly Prokofiev and Bartók, those two more than any others, came back to the past when they were older. And I think we tend to remember them for what they said when they were young, kind of immature. You know, I think I remember a quote from Prokofiev, which was that the time had come to do without Mozart, and that Chopin was dead and buried and we should forget it. Well, of course he didn't believe that later at all, but it's when he said it that he's remembered for. And I think that's a shame. But Bartók had the same experience, I think, because they're both very much mellowed when they were older. And it's very obvious that they looked to the past for huge inspiration and received it in their later music in particular.
But before we get to the 2nd sonata, which is what our first musical story, we are going to talk generally of how his music was received, how this early music was received. And he was called Enfant terrible. Yeah, so this is actually a lovely painting of him by his son, Oleg, yeah, which presents him as this somebody who really wants to annoy people. And he did annoy people. And I have a selection of quotations here. Yeah, where people say that his music hails from the 4th dimensions, that this is actually about the 2nd sonata, yeah, then the andante and the finale are wild orgies of harmonic incongruities, yeah, that his talent may be healthy. It's actually, everyone was always saying that his talent is healthy, but it's been warped, yeah, by modernism, by the clutches of modernism. Some people felt revolted by this music. Yeah, one of the critics say these pieces left a revolting impression. They are like a hideous tumor on the body of Russian music. So that's just the strength, yeah, of the opinion. that persisted all throughout the period before 1917. That's not weren't all of them, but nevertheless they underlined the barbarism. Yeah, they always compared him with a savage. There's some quite racist comments even, yeah, that people have made both in Russia and outside Russia, trying to explain this rhythmic propulsion. Yeah, that they actually Bartók had as well. I was trying, I told you about this, I was trying to find out whether Prokofiev and Bartók knew of each other, yeah, because they both created this very percussive style of pianism, which was described as barbaric. And it seems there is not a single comment from either of them, as if they existed in parallel universes completely, you know. So it's very difficult who was first, to say who was first, yeah, to come up with that.
It's hard to imagine that they wouldn't be aware of each other. But one was Hungarian, the other was Russian. Perhaps there's something there.
And they would have met in Paris possibly, you know, but that's the truth. Just, you know, again, before we get to the second sonata, I wanted to mention two influences, because it's obvious that he was influenced by Scriabin. Would you say that that was true? Probably in the first sonata you can hear that. And he admired Scriabin a lot, but it was a very different thing, yeah, so he didn't quite follow him. And he admired Rachmaninov as well. But I think the two people that have something to do with it who are much less known are Rebikov, Vladimir Rebikov, and Nikolai Medtner. So Rebikov was also this notorious modernist who was kind of inventing things like this one. This is a piece which all moves in these parallel, strange chords. And that's how it goes. So everyone thought, so there are pieces which are, for example, all in parallel fifths or all in augmented triads. And I think Prokofiev, in some of his Vision Fugitive, for example, was actually influenced by Rebikov. Yeah. And another one is Medtner. What is strange about this, yeah, that it's written in 8/8, but which is divided in 3/3 and 2, which so it's a kind of rhythmic, a little bit like what he does in the seventh sonata, maybe, possibly.
Yes. And actually, there's a certain, I don't suppose it's an influence, but there's a certain suggestion of jazz there, isn't there? As well as Bartók doing very much the same kind of thing in his Mikrokosmos. And many other pieces as well. Exactly the same approach to rhythm, but ignored.
But so he wasn't alone, yeah, in that period. But talking about the second sonata, it's a wonderful piece which was written in 1912, yeah, and that's kind of the first one which really breaks into Prokofiev's style. And another critic said that he was a humorist, yeah, that he is a composer who was able to create music that was humorous. And we didn't have that in Scriabin, we didn't quite have that in Rachmaninoff. So that is something new, and that's which stays with Prokofiev.
Well, a different personality, very much so. But the fact that he admired those two other composers very much, of course, doesn't mean that he would be the same in his approach at all. This sonata presents me with quite an interesting dichotomy, and it always has done. Well, actually, the whole of Prokofiev's output, really, but this one, because it's early, it's therefore from the period in which he was thought of as being barbaric. And yet, it's very light, generally speaking. And one thing that I can tell you from my own experience of being on juries of competitions is that this sonata is played quite a lot. And it's played as if whenever the composer, and this would apply to Bartók as well, whenever the composer writes polka forte or anything that's relatively moderate, so many pianists see it as a green light to smash the living daylights out of the piano, as if it's all not an excuse, but an opportunity is provided by anything above, let's say, mezzo piano, to play very loudly and rather unpleasantly. And actually that completely loses the humour. And I've mentioned it to plenty of people. We've chosen, by coincidence, the fourth movement of this remarkable sonata. There isn't a single fortissimo in the whole movement. And there's only one, I think, or maybe two, earlier on in the piece, in the sonata. I think we're having a little trouble with our electronics.
It's all right. It's all right. Go ahead.
I think that the interesting point there is that there is so much about Bartók and Prokofiev and Stravinsky and all that generation of composers that we miss because we took, as I referred to before, we take too much notice of what they said, and they appear to be rejecting the past, which is a negative thing to do, of course. And what that, I think we can probably read into that, is that the way of playing at the time was very much against their nature. And so they were rebellious, it's as simple as that, because they were young. And later on, that all changed. The sound world, the colours that you can get from the piano, and from any other instrument for that matter. But as Prokofiev was a pianist, I suppose it applies to the piano more than any other. And you know, the unbelievable variety of tones you can get from the instrument. He certainly wouldn't have wanted you to get rid of them and just play percussively. Or at least, if he did, I'm going to defy him, I'm afraid, because the music is immensely greater if you bear in mind.
Well, I think, Peter, that at the time he would have played it probably with a lot of force, and yes, that's probably, you know, the crudeness that Jesipa was talking about.
But why would you mark it forte only? It never gets above forte. And even that is not particularly harsh.
Yeah.
It's just that the harmonies are rather acerbic. But the actual sound that he wants you to make seems to be contradicted in the score by what we heard him say. So I know that I'm being a little controversial, but I do genuinely believe it. The music fits into the whole history of music much better as a continuum, going back right to particularly Russian music of the 19th century and right through the 20th, if we think of it as part of a whole and not just a rejection of something that was already great and already in existence.
I think we can talk about the finale's humor. Do you want to mention it before you play or after?
Well, yes, I can certainly.
The Beethoven connection.
The Beethoven connection may be coincidental. I don't really know, but I remember that in the fourth movement of Beethoven's Eighth Symphony, which I can't play on the piano. There is a Liszt transcription, but it's absolutely impossible. So I'm not going to expose myself to that. But during the symphony, which is in F major, or at least in this movement, there is this recurrent D flat, which appears to be totally incongruous. But then later on in the movement, you suddenly realise that he's using it as the dominant of F sharp minor, which of course is far removed from the basic tonality of F major. And I think Prokofiev copied it. I have no documentary evidence to support that. But in this movement, there's this long passage where a C sharp keeps interrupting the proceedings. And I suspect it's the same idea. And I'll just play a little bit of that just to demonstrate what I mean. That was a very harsh C sharp, I realise that. But it keeps coming for another page and a half. And it doesn't seem to have any place in it. This note that just comes out of nowhere every few bars. And then at the very end of the next page, it goes... and you suddenly realise it's actually the leading note of D minor, which seems to me to be very much the same idea as Beethoven. And I suspect that was a nod in his direction. And the other thing was that these may well be rumours, or just Chinese whispers, I don't know. But I have heard over the years from several sources that Prokofiev got really very fed up with being dragged to the opera. in his home city, which was St. Petersburg, I guess, because it was always Carmen that was being shown. And he grew to dislike that opera intensely, which is a shame, because it's a great opera. But, of course, the main thing that goes... my own harmonies, by the way. But that series of notes comes at least twice in this sonata, very much so, and I suspect it is poking fun at the opera. This is where it appears in the fourth movement. Etc. And it's much more extended in the first movement. I can't imagine it's a coincidence.
So there might be some private humor, that we're trying to get at here.
Yes, I think so. So this is the fourth movement of the second sonata. It's a very funny piece, really. I'm just smiling to myself.
Yes, you can imagine that how they felt it was barbaric. Yeah, couldn't it? That's quite a lot of harmonies in there that were very unfamiliar.
At that time, extremely. And actually, I was going to mention before, in the first sonata of Prokofiev, which is a short piece of only 1 minute long, one movement long, there is nothing like that at all. It's extremely romantic and very reminiscent of Tchaikovsky. And so I guess the first piano concerto, which came as Opus 10, and this Opus 14, would have seemed really, well, they would have done, it would have dumbfounded the people at the conservatory for sure, and all the critics and everything. It must be terrible to be thought of as an enfant terrible when you're a student, mustn't it?
Yeah, but then he goes to America. So what happens is that after the Russian Revolution, he decides that his career is not going to develop well while the Civil War is going on. So he takes the train, the Trans-Siberian train, and goes via Japan and the Philippines and Los Angeles and ends up in New York. And look, they meet him with the same, the terrible infant, which sounds even worse, I suppose. And the standard bearer of musical materialism. So this music was heard as being kind of not idealist, not transcendent, but very much connected to things like sport or things like industry, the material things, the dynamic things, the new era. And the same thing was said about his playing. Of my playing, they said that it had too little gradation, but that I had steel fingers, steel wrists, steel biceps and triceps. And only some Russian critics, such as Karatigin, whom I've placed here in the middle, noticed something else, that there was lyricism, and this is what he said. And this is always the pattern during the whole of Prokofiev's life. It's always like they're saying, don't think that he has fingers of steel. He has something else. He has lyricism and he has profundity. And one of the critics says he actually is a profound composer who doesn't want to be seen as a profound composer. Which is exactly what I think what you were saying. So this lyricism, this is something gentle, something sweet, something tender. Pearls of fine musical poetry. Not everyone was noticing that.
Was there any evidence that he was actually physically very strong?
Well, he was very tall, and they always commented on that again. They commented on his height and on his red hair. And they would make all these racist comments about Asians, Scythians, or Russians or Slavs or whatever. So he was kind of a representative of this savage energy. But so now that we are now that we are abroad in the period when he was in foreign countries and was touring, I wanted to show you that he was both in and out of fashion. He was constantly rivaling with Stravinsky. And his music was sometimes seen as old-fashioned. This is a great paradox. That suddenly, he moves to Paris in the 1920s and he becomes old-fashioned. So here I just wanted to talk a little bit more about his style in general, because his style, once he found it, I don't think it changed that much. He was very, very true to himself, so to speak. And this is what he says to his friend Dukielsky, who also was an émigré. I'm flattered to hear that some of my works are not of their time. Perhaps this is one of the reasons why people who are too much of their time often fail to understand my language. And I think that's a dig at Stravinsky, because Stravinsky was really kind of driving the fashion at the time. So what can we say in terms of Prokofiev's style and its actually traditional features? So he was always trying to be original. That's one thing, and that was already being considered old-fashioned, because Stravinsky was bringing various idioms from the past and borrowing material, which Prokofiev could not quite, he could not abide that. He wanted to compose his own original things. The fact that he was also composing themes, Yeah, that was also a very old-fashioned thing to do.
He had a great melodic gift in that,
Yeah,
didn't
he had a melodic gift,
later.
And he carried a notebook with him. He wrote them down, like I don't know, as if he was Beethoven, somebody like that. And then maybe several years later, he would take that notebook out and use that theme. He wrote melodies, but they are always Prokofievan melodies. And this is the one that I wanted to demonstrate as an example. I don't know whether you want to play just the beginning of it.
This is the beginning of the 8th sonata.
Yeah. So it's a melody, it's the opposite of a Rachmaninov melody, which always goes step by step. Yeah, so this is a melody that has huge intervals. It goes up in huge leaps and then comes back. And it's always has a huge range. So it's not something that is easy to sing, and it's quite hard to remember. Yeah, and also because he doesn't want to use the cliches. Yeah, he changes them. So it's when you're trying to remember it and sing it, you get it wrong, because it's sort of slightly off. And I also think another feature of Prokofiev's melodies is that they're hard to make sense without the harmony. Yeah, so to talk about the themes, we also have to talk about harmony. Yeah. So, or tonality rather. Yeah. So. And this is another thing, that Prokofiev was and remained always a tonal composer. He was absolutely, even though some of the passages in the 7th sonata, are almost atonal, but there is always a center. And that's not all. It's not just that he is using tonality and that he is using chords, but these chords have conventional functions. He actually has cadences. So which create tension. So we kind of know that we are moving, towards the cadence, gradually edging towards it, and then, it finally arrives. And it creates this suspense just as Beethoven would do. And it's amazing to do that in the 20th century because almost nobody does that. Even those people who write tonally, they would usually not use functional harmony. And it's his favorite key is C major. Am I right?
I think so. Yes.
I think he wrote probably about 100 pieces in C major. And so this is the sonata number 5, which moves, and you can hear it from the tonic via an array of keys, which are all the keys they don't expect, but it always comes back. So you kind of sense when it's going to come back to the dominant or to the tonic. I don't know whether you want to play that one.
Yeah, I'll certainly play that in a moment. I'd like to say that it's one of my favourite pieces of Prokofiev, number 5. Almost never played because it's very enigmatic and it doesn't have any of those sort of grand virtuoso gestures that one associates with 20th century piano composers. And it's the only one of the 9 completed sonatas that he wrote outside Russia, as Marina mentioned before. In other words, he probably, when he was in Paris, he probably felt a sense of competition with the other composers who'd settled there, which did include Stravinsky and many other very big names. There is an element of this piece that's a little bit like Stravinsky, but I think it actually is very French. There's also Poulenc, I think you can hear particularly in the opening of the sonata, and several other influences are there. He's not quite so, well, what's the right word? It's not like a bull in a china shop at all in this piece, put it that way.
of chords there.
Wonderful.
Yeah, but you're still in C major. This is a very typical thing. Now, you mentioned Poulenc. I have to say that I think Poulenc learned something from this, because he actually almost quotes it in his flute sonata, I think. You know, he was a great, great fan of Prokofiev. But at the same time, if you look, this is another C major piece. This is the 9th sonata. Yeah, and you can see that it can be simplified. Yeah, so you had many more keys that he's gone through in the 5th compared to the 9th. So, yeah, so he can complicate his style and he can simplify his style at will. But the principle of starting from the tonic and coming back to it, yeah, remains the same.
And this is during Prokofiev's mellowed out period, when he was quite a lot, obviously later than the famous 6th, 7th and 8th sonatas, the trilogy. And it's very beautiful piece, rather like the 7th symphony, which I think was written even later than this. And just both amongst my personal favourites. I'm less drawn to the really noisy ones, like the 2nd concerto, for example. Although I know there are wonderful parts of that as well. But this is the Prokofiev that's very dear to me. If I can just play a little of this, if we've got time. It's gorgeous, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and you can say it's almost conventional harmony, yeah, but there are these little touches, yeah, that tell us that it's Prokofiev. Yeah, so that is very typical.
One of the things that I'd like to just comment on, this is a slightly humorous aside, but when Prokofiev writes things that are, as Marina actually says, they're tonal, but there's something a little acerbic in there. When it's actually a dissonance, but it's kind of almost C major, it makes the pianist sound like they've made a mess of the piece, that they're actually played wrong notes. And the most obvious one to me is the end of the 4th sonata, which is one of my favourite ones, but it actually goes like this. So that last chord in particular, it sounds like it ought to be that, doesn't it, really? And I could very easily imagine a piece that does finish like that, and getting too nervous and playing. Yeah. That could very easily happen with those two notes that shouldn't be there. And I would like to actually meet him and ask him what he thought he was playing at to do that. It's actually like a joke on the pianist.
Yes, well, there are plenty of them. I think, you know, the finale of the 2nd sonata is as well. Yeah, so then the next thing I would like to mention is what I call the montage principle. It's the way he structures his works, that, you know, he puts these themes together, and they don't necessarily grow organically, as we say, yeah, at least, you know, in the youthful pieces, not so much maybe in the Soviet pieces where he tries to draw more connections between them. But in principle, yeah, it goes one theme, then another theme, then another theme. And he was extremely businesslike about revising his works and recycling the themes. And say the works that couldn't be performed, he would make something else out of it. You know, if the opera can't get staged, he would create a symphony out of it. And he also used the secretary, yeah, to write out orchestrations for him and things. And he said, well, on one occasion, just leave 2 bars there for me, I will write a transition. Yeah, so this is a very interesting way to compose, isn't it? Yeah, so to actually, he knows the transition is going to be 2 bars, and I'm going to write it later. Yeah, so there is something businesslike about kind of arranging these things into this montage of themes. Now what I wanted to mention are different kind of images or different topics, as we can call them, yeah, musical topics in his music that keep recurring. And one of them, I like calling it machine music because it was so much connected to the age of industrialization all over the world and the fear of the machine and the worship of the machine. So I wanted to play you a little bit of the very famous film Metropolis by Fritz Lang from 1927 with the original score, where you will hear this topic. So very different repeated patterns. Yeah, so if you look at something like this, yeah, this is the Sixth Sonata. I think this is very much, if you ask what the Sixth Sonata is about. Of course, it's music that is abstract, it doesn't have a program. But the topic, I think, is very much this kind of machine music, yeah, and the movement, especially, I don't know whether you could play those quavers there. It is that kind of energy.
And this is a very good moment to mention the possibly misunderstood nature of all those three sonatas, numbers 6, 7, and 8, particularly the first movement of this one, and also the third movement of number 7, which we'll hear later on. They were described many times as the War Trilogy, and I think they were also interpreted as a kind of anti-Soviet protest on the part of Prokofiev as well by a lot of people, failing to realize that actually Stalin was extremely supportive of these works, and I think he was at least one of the first performances of them, maybe more than one, I don't know. I dare say there's more to the story than that, but that was...
Don't steal my story.
And the main reason for mentioning it is that particularly in the case of this movement, the first movement of number 6, there is very definitely a feeling in my mind that it's about the industrialization of the 20th century and represents, as you were saying, Marina, about Metropolis and all the rest of it. It's actually machines. It's nothing to do with politics and it's nothing to do with war, really.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
And I think that changes the way you play it, of course. Very much so.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. But there's also this thing, that this very famous col pugno, where you have to strike the piano with a fist.
Which sadly doesn't work, because your fingers are much stronger on the keyboard than any fist could ever be.
Right.
You do that, it's just... but you can actually hear the sound, the actual harmony there. And I think it's very important to do
if it was an orchestral piece, you would have like a huge sheet of metal being thrashed at that point, or something like that.
Or a bass drum, maybe.
Yeah,
a big bass drum.
Yeah. So it's a kind of it's a symbolic thing. And the interesting thing is that in the Soviet editions, they took that out, that remark. I think because that was too offensive. Yeah, they didn't want to damage the Soviet pianos, I think.
Well, I think I support their approach.
Right. Okay.
Only on that. I should say.
Then the other one that is also very typical is what I call devilry, and what we heard already in this demonic possession or suggestion diabolique. You have to remember that Prokofiev also comes from the time of symbolism, the time of Scriabin and the time of these spiritist seance, when they were trying to talk to the spirit, and he was always fascinated by this. He somehow almost believed in these evil forces sometimes, so much that he wrote a huge opera about this demonic possession, which is called The Fiery Angel. And I wanted to play you just a little bit to give you the idea of what kind of music is written for this possession. So this again, repeated phrases with repeated notes, yeah, like an incantation. And I find that too, I don't know whether you will agree, but I find that all things like that with repeated notes that appear in piano sonatas refer to that topic, yeah, of some kind of terrible anxiety or possibly even demonic possession. I think in the sixth sonata I can hear this very clearly. Yeah.
But the seventh, the lower one is from the beginning of the seventh sonata. Yeah.
I don't know. That one may be a bit less, but I think they're all related, to that.
Yes.
That kind of obsession, with some kind of evil. Yeah. So, I think this is. I just put this for fun because we were demonstrating Scriabin's Ninth Sonata a couple of lectures ago, and I think there is a quotation of that in the Sixth Sonata.
The same piece. Yes.
Yeah, you just switched from one to another. Yeah, so people might not even have noticed. Yeah, but he actually quotes. So he quotes that evil sonata in that context. So I think that confirms to us, again, what it is about. But then there are other things. Yeah, there's neoclassicism. There's of course the thing with neoclassicism is that Stravinsky managed to somehow patent it. Yeah, as we discussed last time, and Prokofiev was actually the first person to do it properly in his classical symphony in 1917. Yeah, so he was a little bit upset by the fact that Stravinsky's name was always connected to neoclassicism, and Prokofiev, felt he was missing out, and he didn't quite believe in the kind of thing that Stravinsky was doing. But there is quite a lot of it, though. He does it in his own way. Yeah. So, for example, the beginning of Sonata Number 4 is a kind of minuet with trills, and he quite likes things like that, minuets, gavottes, dances like that. So that's one part of it. Or the beginning of the Sonata Number 5 finale. It looks to me as one of Mozart's sonatas. Yeah, if you're not wearing the correct glasses, you might. Actually confuse it.
It's very noticeable that almost all our excerpts are gentle music. They're really very, innocent sounding a lot of the time, and very, very underpowered, and very much against the image of Prokofiev. Yes, I'll play those. Dark minuet.
Dark minuet, yeah.
And this is the finale of the fifth.
can't remember quite which Mozart sonata it reminds me of, but there is one line. Possibly. Now, this is something else, that comes sort of after neoclassicism, and this is what we call the new simplicity. And this sudden, after everything, after the second concerto and the second symphony, which are all very metallic, very industrial, extremely dissonant, he suddenly clarifies his style, and that actually has to do with a kind of religious conversion that he went through in the 20s. And it had to deal with Christian Science. So the doctrine of Mary Baker Eddy, you can see as she wrote this book, Science and Health, in 1875. And to what extent Prokofiev really believed in all this is very hard to say, but he used Christian Science, I think, in two ways. First of all, it had to do with believing that your sickness is all in the head, that you could actually, by thinking the right things, the right positive thoughts, you could get ourselves, for example, out of a headache. And he had always headaches, which prevented him from composing in the morning. So he was working on this and really believed in kind of changing, by changing his attitude, he would be able to affect his state of health. So,
from what I can remember of my visits to Russia, there are probably other reasons why you have a headache in the morning. Because I wouldn't know about Prokofiev particularly.
Well, there were receptions, of course, after concerts. That's true. And this is one of the quotes. As God is the unique source of creation and of reason, and man is his reflection, it is abundantly clear that the works of man will be better the more closely they reflect the works of the Creator. In other words, the nearer they come to him. I must unflaggingly hold on to this thought all the time I'm working. One should not work unless one feels oneself to be sufficiently pure. So he starts looking for purity, and he actually tells us that these two pieces, very enigmatic, which are called Things in Themselves, are connected to Christian Science. Because things in themselves are these ideas that exist in the world. Christian scientists will tell you the material world doesn't actually exist. So he really believed that these pieces were the beginning of something new. And he also was now embarrassed about the fiery angel and all that devilry. So he really has the conflict between the evil side, that was fascinating him, and this purity that he was trying to develop. And I don't know whether you would agree with me, but I think the Ninth Sonata, which you already demonstrated, might have to do something with this idea of purity and healing, because he was very sick when he wrote it. It was 1947, it was after his fall, he nearly died. Since then, he never quite recovered until 1953 when he actually died. So that is something that I cannot prove, because the Prokofiev's diaries do not go into the Soviet period. We don't know whether he kept him or whether he destroyed him, so we have no way of accessing that information. But it might have to do something with this idea of purity and healing, and it might be that during the Soviet times he was also kind of practicing Christian Science for himself.
But I would say that, just speaking without having really thought about this before, but there are lots of examples of purity in his earlier music as well. And we've already been through some of them. But could I play you a little excerpt from the Fourth Sonata? And if there is anything that completely contradicts the sort of stereotype of Prokofiev as a pianist, this has to be the greatest example. etc. Absolutely wonderful passage, I think. And
yes,
again,
so,
very gentle.
Yeah, so you might be right, yeah, that he always wanted to write themes like that. It's just at that point he decided that it was also ideologically correct to do that, I suppose.
Well, yes. And he turned away from his original personality, which is essentially what I said at the beginning. I think that he reversed his approach from that thing that he's remembered for, which is casting out the past. Very much so.
So when he comes back to the USSR, one of the things that they give him, as a prize for that is the ability to go into the summer retreat and compose music. And he composes his Romeo and Juliet, which is a kind of ballet which is very different from the ballet that he composed for Diaghilev. It's again much brighter and in a way possibly simpler. And there's something more human about it. So gradually he becomes more and more affected by the aesthetic of socialist realism, which privileged emotion much more than the kind of aesthetic of non-expression that Stravinsky was trying to impose on him. And he sort of, I think, partially maybe went along with it in the 20s. We are now in the USSR, and we'll just talk a little bit about the three sonatas 6, 7, 8 as a group. And you've mentioned this already, that they are not really the war sonatas. And it seems that he decided to write them when he was planning an American trip. At the start, he was still thought that he would be allowed to go. But the trip was for the start of 1940. And maybe he would be playing those sonatas, if you could go there. But of course, the war started, and that prevented him. But he started writing these three sonatas at the very same moment, all 10 movements at the same time, but finished them at different times. And it seems that at that time he was reading Romain Rolland's Life of Beethoven, which is the book which is also very dear to me. It's a Soviet edition of 1937, but that's also the book that changed my life, so I thought I'd mention that. And there might be some connections, or the ambition of these sonatas might have something to do with Beethoven's sonatas. One of them was in 4 movements, such as number 6. Well, people refer to this motif from Appassionata appearing in number 7. So there might be references to Beethoven. But generally, I think it's the ambition, the scope, and also the connectedness, this more organic nature of these sonatas that is different from all the early music.
Well, those 3 sonatas, of course, particularly 6 and 7, maybe even more particularly number 7, are the piano works of Prokofiev that are most frequently played. And he's kind of judged on the basis of these 3, really. And they are massive, all 3 of them, massive in scale, and can very easily be explosively loud in many ways, and usually are. Including some of my own performances when I was young and immature, like Prokofiev used to be. But they are symphonic works in a way that he hadn't really done before. And as you say, they are sort of linked. There are certain aspects of them that you can feel go through them. So it is almost like one work. And in fact, if they're played as a single work, it's incredibly satisfying.
And another thing that I would mention here, another influence, is his second wife, Mira, who wasn't second wife at the time. It was rather a difficult story for him, but he fell in love in 1939 with this very young woman, and he fell in love during his summer holiday where he was dancing the Boston Waltz. And he learned to dance. I mean, you can't really imagine. He probably was an incredibly awkward dancer. You can't imagine him being a good dancer somehow. But nevertheless, he learned to dance the Boston Waltz, and I think there is a Boston Waltz in the 6th sonata. The 8th sonata, even more explicitly, is connected to Mira. He says that the first theme, which he already played, came into his head when he was walking with her. And it also contains quotations from 2 works that couldn't be performed at the time. It's his Eugene Onegin, his Queen of Spades. Yeah, the Queen of Spades was supposed to be the film, and Eugene Onegin was supposed to be a staged production. So the female heroines, Tatiana and Lisa, they end up in that first movement of the Eighth Sonata as well. So I think they're connected, to his love and youth and this lyricism, the lyricism in the Eighth Sonata in particular, and the slow movements of the Sixth and the Seventh is connected to Mira. I will now mention, I'm trying to clear up the misunderstanding about Stalin liking the Seventh Sonata. Peter, I'm sorry. Well, that's the point where we have to disagree.
Oh, okay. Right.
Okay.
Well, it's just general knowledge.
Okay. Well, I've written a book about it. So let me just tell you what the story was. Yeah. So the story was that Prokofiev was trying to get awarded with a Stalin Prize like everyone was, but they were denying it to him year after year. For his Alexander Nevsky, they denied him, didn't give it even for the Stalin cantata. Suddenly, in 1943, he received the Stalin Prize for this sonata. Yeah, so this is where I think this creeps in, that must have something to do with Stalin liking it. Stalin may not have heard it at all. It has nothing to do with him. The committee decided that it was time to award him a prize. Yeah, there's a kind of backstage deliberations that we know about. The prize, as you can see here, was changed from the first class to the second class, which means that he lost half the money. Just as a result, that they decided, well, maybe we will give the Shabalin's quartet, the first prize, and not Prokofiev. But Prokofiev was absolutely astonished that he received the prize for this sonata and not for something else. Why would they give the prize to such a convoluted piece when it had been denied to pieces that were simpler and more transparent? And so he couldn't understand, because that is one of the most eternal and harsh things, and so on. And yet, you cannot, I don't think you can draw any conclusions about whether Stalin liked it or not, whether he even heard it. But the fact was that indeed it was heard in a completely different way, I think, from the way he intended it. Because all these jazz influences, possibly, influences of Western music, influences of Stravinsky, influence of Stravinsky, they didn't mention. What they heard in it is what Sviatoslav Richter said in his famous quotation. They were hearing the war, the tragedy of the war, and then the triumphant kind of march of Soviet troops in the finale. And this is why, it's because a musicologist wrote about it in this way, he was able to get that prize. So it's kind of a mishearing, in a sense, of the Seventh Sonata. I think
yes, definitely. It's misheard for sure, and misinterpreted in performance because of it. Yeah, very much so.
So just to close his life, before Peter is going to play the slow movement and the finale of the Seventh Sonata at the very end, but just before we get to that point, I would like to mention a few things about his very last years, because after living this very successful life, including a successful life in the Soviet Union, the last few years are just incredibly tragic. And it all starts with this fall and this health troubles, and then there is a denunciation of him in 1948 by the officials when his music is not being played anymore. Very humiliating attempts to rehabilitate them, help him to write a kind of party cantata. Incredibly sort of awful things in terms of professional career. And then the worst possibly thing is that his first wife is arrested and taken to the labor camp, and he basically cannot do anything about it. His children are maybe not quite grown up. He can't really help them. It's an awful situation that you just cannot imagine. So the combination of these things made his life extremely difficult. But he was focusing on composition despite not being allowed to compose because of his condition. He was stealing little napkins so that he could write his themes on when he was in hospital. And he was planning new works. And so I wanted you to play this very poignant piece of music, which is the little fragment of the 10th sonata that he planned.
Which he only completed essentially 2 pages of it, and it just finishes in the middle, at the end of one bar in the middle of a phrase, which it's very enticing because it's really great music, but it just stops, and it's very, very intriguing to imagine what it would be like later. Where it stops.
I always find this amazing that I know that it will stop, and yet every single time when that second theme comes in, I think it's going to continue. Yeah, it grips you somehow. Yeah.
Yes, it is. It's very intriguing music. Interesting that he should do this strange chord progression in the middle. And then go into something in G minor. Which, that is actually a quote from one of his sonatinas from much earlier, that strange chord progression, which is verging on the atonal, isn't it? And totally different in style to the rest of it. I wonder what would have happened had he finished it and revised it. There are so many examples of that, there aren't there? So, across the ages of composers who we can only imagine what they would have done next.
Yes, but the idea is to finish with something that is more uplifting.
He's already done. I have a question. Well, first of all, I'd like to point out something, and then I have a question. This famous rhythmic sequence from the final dance of Stravinsky's Rite of Spring. I'm making the chords up, but the main one is which is a timpani part, of course. In the 7th sonata of Prokofiev, the finale essentially is obsessively around this motif. That keeps on coming. And of course it's several decades later than the Rite of Spring, but it very definitely a quotation.
Absolutely, I completely agree with you. I know that I learned it from you, but I already put it in one of my articles. So I just wanted to remind you that he played the Rite of Spring with Stravinsky, and he was probably playing the bass part. He actually was playing the bass part, we're sure about that. So that is definitely coming back here. Yes. Yeah. So it has more to do with the Rite of Spring than with the Soviet army. Yeah?
Well, I would like to think that's true, because, you know, if it really is about the Soviet army, then, of course, its relevance will gradually die away with history, which is a terrible shame. I'd like to think of it much more as an abstract piece with influences from Stravinsky, not something that describes a political situation. I think it's important to do that. You know, I'd rather hear about the abstract nature of Beethoven's Eroica Symphony than hear about Napoleon and the fact that he tore up the dedication page and all of that. It's more important to me that the content of the music, and that's really what I'm trying to say. My question, which I don't think anyone really knows the answer to, is why is the third movement of this sonata marked precipitato? What does that actually mean? Because, you know, interpretatively, that's presented all pianists with a problem if they've thought about it. Does it mean that it gradually gets faster? Or is it something in the character that sort of falls over itself and it's therefore urgent all the time? It's very difficult to know quite what he means. And I know that people will always turn to to resort to thinking about what Prokofiev or any other composer said at the time about somebody's performance. Or if there's a recording that he approved of, then that must be right. I actually don't believe that as a philosophy generally. I don't think it works at all like that, because all the composers I've ever known have been incredibly grateful that you're playing it at all, and would never comment in any great detail on anything like that. So I just wonder whether our traditional performance of this piece is actually wrong, not to start slowly and get gradually quicker. I've never tried it, and I've played it quite a lot. I've recorded it, by the way. I did record all the sonatas available. There's all good recording outlets, as previously mentioned about Stravinsky and Scriabin and others. I'm sorry, I just had to get that in. But that recording doesn't get any faster either. I just play it at a steady tempo, I hope. So, what do we think about the second movement and the influences on that? It seems very sleazy to me in character.
Yes, I think that is also a Western influence. Yeah, it seems like it's also has some kind of music hall influence. Yeah, very Western. So not Soviet at all. Yeah, you know, the idea of this being all about the Soviet participation in the war just feels completely wrong to me.
It's very interesting, isn't it? Right. I think it's worth mentioning again, although I think we already have. This is the piano solo work of Prokofiev that is played most frequently. In other words, in a lot of people's minds, this represents Prokofiev as a whole. And I don't believe it does really, in any case, though, if you realise just how different his music can be, how unbelievably diverse, it changes your approach to this piece as well. And I think that's worth saying about so many examples, so many composers. Thank you very much.